vous souhaiter la bienvenue au jour 1 du Forum de recherche en politique climatique au Canada. I would like to welcome you to the first day of the Forum on Strategic Dialogue on Climate Change Policy Research in Canada. There is no simultaneous translation that is available. However, you can intervene in the language of your choice. Donc, il n'y a pas de traduction simultanée, mais vous pourrez intervenir là, dans la langue de votre choix. L'anglais va être le dominant, évidemment. So, we will try to make sure to enforce strictly the schedule. And because we expect a lot of people, please raise your hand with on Zoom, or write an intervention in the chat box. We might come back and ask you to reformulate your question orally. That will depend how things work. If you want to acknowledge a territory, you can go on http://nativeland.ca to see what land you should acknowledge for your territory. I would like to first say a few words about one of the two organizing institutions, which is the Institut de l'Énergie Trottier. Uranos is with the Institut de l'Énergie Trottier, one of the two co-organizers for CICC. So the Trottier Energy Institute exists for 6 years now. It's been funded with the support of a donation from the Trottier Family Foundation. Its mission is threefold. We have to support academic training, we support research, and we involve quite a lot in the dissemination of knowledge at the various levels regarding the energy transition. So we've been acting since we've existed. We've published a number of reports. We have a Canadian Energy Outlook that we've published in 2018. We're preparing the second edition this year. We've published a number of reports discussing how we could structure the capacity of Canada to go onto the energy transition. And we've been leading the Energy Modeling Initiative, for example, last year. We're continuing this initiative this year. We've been involved in the Canadian Centre for Energy Information, and we've also been involved with the Canadian Institute for Climate Choice. So the workshop objective today are manifold. So you've seen them before. I will not go in details over all of them, but essentially it's a question of fostering a constructive dialogue on the critical climate choices that we're facing in Canada, and identify research priorities that could be developed with the support of a nonprofit organization and foundations, and help inform also the research agenda for the Canadian Institute for Climate Choice. And as a whole, also to strengthen the interaction between and the relationship between the various top climate policy researchers and thinkers all across Canada. So that's a very broad objective, very ambitious objective. So I'm glad that you're here. So the workshop was done because of the online approach in a different way. So we first organized thematic discussions that took place from the middle of September over 2 weeks, over 4 teams, so 3 teams with workshops, 1 team just online. And today and tomorrow is the final of this activity, which is in 2 3-hour forums, a forum on 2 3-hour sessions today and tomorrow. Today we'll be mostly focusing on natural resources and climate change, and tomorrow we'll go back to the policy issue, gaps and research priorities. So you've seen the agenda. I will not go into more detail in this. So let's start. I would like to start first by welcoming Peter Nicholson, who will say a few words as part of as chair of the board of the Canadian Institute for Climate Choice. So Peter,
okay, thank you, Normand, and bonjour tout le monde, and good afternoon, everyone. As you know, my name is Peter Nicholson, and I'm chair of the board of the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices, and in that regard, it's my honor on behalf of the Institute to welcome everyone to today's dialogue and forum. Now, I'm speaking from my home in Annapolis Royal, Nova Scotia, which is situated on the land of the Mi'kmaq Nation, which is part of the Wabanaki Confederacy that once dominated a really vast territory stretching all the way from New Hampshire to Newfoundland and Labrador. But the particular piece of geography where I now sit is also the site of the first permanent European settlement in what is now Canada, which was visited in 1605 by the great French explorer Samuel de Champlain, whose small expedition was welcomed and indeed sustained through the first harsh winters by the indigenous inhabitants, for whom this land and sea were home for more than 10,000 years. And today I am sitting literally only a few hundred meters from Acadian dikes that were constructed in the 1630s and that still channel the tides of the Bay of Fundy, which are said to be the world's highest. But how much longer will the tide be held off this ancient land? Climate models reduced to local scale predict that our particular low-lying riverside community is at high risk of total inundation as early as 2050 if the present warming trend continues. So our purpose in today's forum and the work of the Institute, whose board I chair, is certainly no abstraction for those of us living along the tidal banks of the Annapolis River. And although most of us, perhaps everyone here today, will already be familiar with the new Institute on Climate Choices, I want to take just a few minutes to remind ourselves of our origins, our mandate, and our early accomplishments. Now, the embryo from which the Institute emerged was something called the Pan-Canadian Expert Collaboration. And this was an ad hoc group of 21 organizations. And these included our host today, Urenos and l'Institut de l'Énergie Trottier, who volunteered to partner with the Institute to host this event, and to whom I want to formally extend our sincere thanks. I would also convey our gratitude to the Ivy Foundation for its generous financial support for this event. Now, as a result of a competition sponsored by the federal government 2 years ago, the collaboration was chosen to create what in January this year launched publicly as the Institute, the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices. Now, our mandate is to generate, to synthesize, and to communicate trusted information, policy advice, and best practices to Canadians and their governments. The Institute will do this through rigorous research while engaging with stakeholders and rights holders every step of the way. Now, from the outset, a differentiating feature of the Institute's approach has been to address climate mitigation, adaptation, and clean growth in an integrated way, recognizing what I think is obvious to this group, that climate change is first and foremost a systemic challenge that cannot be fit into intellectual silos. Now, I want to stress that the Institute is an independent organization. Although we have sustaining funding from Environment and Climate Change Canada, our contribution agreement with the government states very explicitly that ECCC has no role in our governance or our management. And indeed, the very value of the Institute lies in its independence and expertise, which, if we do our job well, can contribute evidence-based objectivity to what is inherently an extremely contentious policy arena. Now, it's the job of the board to ensure the Institute's independence, and it is the job of our talented staff, now numbering about 24, and the 36 members of the Institute's expert panels, to provide the solid research and synthesis on which our contribution to knowledge development and wise advice on climate policy will ultimately depend. Now, the Institute intends to fulfill its mandate along 4 principal dimensions. First, by producing rigorous research and evidence-based insight. This has already been illustrated, for example, by the Milestones report released last June, which proposed a framework to make governments more accountable for achieving their stated climate policy goals. And by the just released report on indicators entitled 11 Ways to Measure Clean Growth, which establishes a comprehensive set of metrics to track the integration of climate with key social and economic variables. And we also have well underway major work on the costs of climate change, and notably on potential pathways by which Canada could achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Now, second, the Institute will fulfill its mandate by engaging extensively with experts, business leaders, policymakers, thought leaders, and Canadians more generally, to convene constructive discussions about the choices that lie ahead. There can be no better illustration, of course, than this forum and its preparatory sessions held over the last 2 weeks. Engagement is, of course, an ongoing priority and is facilitated by the Institute's Advisory Council and by the diverse experience and networks of our board. Now, third, the Institute will fulfill its mandate by cultivating a national network of experts from a range of disciplines to share advice and recommendations on developing integrated policy solutions across the multiple facets of climate change. And in fact, the continuous involvement of a broad spectrum of experts is woven right into the DNA of the Institute in the form of our standing expert panels, which constitute what is in effect an extended staff. And fourth, the Institute has a mandate to disseminate best practices by sharing evidence, case studies, and scalable solutions from leading Canadian cities, regions, industry leaders, and others, and importantly from around the world. Now, in this regard, it's important to recognize that true innovation involves far more than a good idea. A new idea, in fact, does not become an innovation unless and until it spreads. The truth is that innovation is mostly imitation, tailored to local circumstances. And that is precisely why the dissemination of best practices will be so important, such an important part of our mandate. Now, when I became chair of the board of the Institute, I was preoccupied from the outset by two overriding questions. First, how could an organization funded by Ottawa preserve both the fact and the appearance of independence? And second, how could this new entity add real value to what is already a crowded ecosystem of climate research and advisory bodies, both here in Canada and around the world? Now, more than a year in, I am confident that we can, in fact, maintain the fact of our independence. The board, expert panels, and our highly professional staff are more than able to keep at bay unwarranted influence coming from any quarter. Meeting the second challenge, which is maximizing our value to the institutional ecosystem, is a work in progress, and it always will be. The truth is that every organization should be challenged to prove its worth every single day. And we understand that the Institute for Climate Choices, despite its deep resources of expertise and its pan-Canadian reach, is nevertheless only one individual in an incredibly rich and diverse institutional ecosystem. And while in any ecosystem, there will always be competition, symbiotic collaboration can be even more powerful, and that is true especially when facing the immense challenge of climate change, where all of our collective resources must be aligned to the task. So in my view, at least, we must be dedicated to finding the best ways to work together toward a common, larger purpose. Which brings us to today's strategic dialogue. Now, this forum is designed, along with other forms of outreach and engagement, to inform the research agenda of the Institute, including opportunities for complementary research with many highly competent organizations active in the climate change field in this country. Time is short, but a lot of groundwork has already been accomplished during the past 2 weeks of discussion on several themes that emerged from some 125 responses to a survey of Canadians actively engaged on the climate change field. Today and tomorrow, we will be drawing these themes together, first in the context of natural resource extraction, as Normand mentioned, which is a particularly acute dilemma in this country, where our bold climate ambitions come face to face with some very harsh economic and regional realities, or what we on the board call the elephant in the room. So in closing, I would urge your discussions to be motivated by idealism, informed by evidence, grounded in pragmatism, and dedicated to the collective collaboration in pursuit of our common objectives. Thank you, Normand.
Thank you very much, Peter.